If you ever thought a royal court was the most pristine place, wait until the truth hits you like a cold slap in summer. This isn't a fairy tale. This is a nightmare gilded in gold. That night, Rothermere Castle blazed like a torch in a dark forest. Over 300 candles burned brightly, reflecting on velvet-draped stone walls and hand-embroidered tapestries from distant Anatolia. Music echoed from the ballroom, strings and woodwinds entwining like fragrant incense smoke. Princess Eleanor's enthronement celebration was the grandest in the Kingdom of Ingril in 3 centuries. People flocked from everywhere: counts, marquises, ladies, scholars, poets, and even warriors who had battled at the edge of the world. All eyes were fixed on her, Eleanor, the Silver Princess, revered for her pure beauty and extraordinary wisdom. She descended the marble staircase, her white silk gown trailing behind her, her cold blue eyes like a winter ocean. A sapphire-studded crown sparkled like a starlit night. Each of her steps was as light as the wind, and the entire crowd held its breath. No one dared to speak, not wanting to interrupt that sacred moment. But then, something strange happened. Beside an old general bowing low, a young lady covered her nose with a silk handkerchief, her eyes wide with panic. A monk near the aisle tilted his head slightly, his brows furrowed. And then, the smell hit. It wasn't lavender. It wasn't frankincense. It was a musty, human, pungent odor, mingling with expensive perfume like spoiled wine mixed with dead fish oil. 1 second of bewilderment, 2 seconds of silence. 3 seconds later, a few guests began to shift their gazes, some stifling coughs. A musician missed a beat. That smell, unmistakable, came from the woman at the center of the ceremony. Eleanor, she smiled, oblivious, because to her that smell was all too familiar. It was the scent of nobility, of royalty, of ritual, and of truth hidden beneath layers of gilded silk. This story is not a royal romance. This is the truth behind the velvet curtain. The truth about people considered the upper echelons of society, yet living in conditions that even a beggar would shun. And Eleanor, celebrated across the continent, was the beginning of a chain of the darkest secrets in Ingril's royal history. For as she sat on her throne, a gentle smile still on her lips, beneath that magnificent gown was a truth no one dared to name. She hadn't bathed in 46 days. Eleanor didn't know she had become the center of whispers. Or rather, she knew but chose not to care, because she had been raised to believe that nobility wasn't in fragrance, but in the blue blood of royalty. And because in Rothermere, frequent bathing was a sign of illness. In the head chambermaid's diary, the old woman Midgen, a scribbled entry read, "Day 47. Today I had to scatter dried rose petals on the princess's bed again. The stench is starting to spread to the lower floors, but no one is allowed to mention it, for that is the command." It was said that Eleanor bathed only once a month, on the night of the full moon, as a sacred ritual to cleanse the soul. The truth was there was nothing divine about it, just a wooden tub, warm enough not to freeze. And the scene that followed could make even a seasoned battlefield soldier wince. For male servants carried buckets of water from the kitchen stove to the palace's highest floor. 3 ladies-in-waiting guarded the hallways so no one would accidentally witness the princess removing the gown that clung to her skin from sweat and dirt. One held a small knife to cut away fabric hardened by secretions. Each bath was a great rescue. Dead skin peeled off in large flakes, dull black like coal dust. The putrid smell from the tub rose like a decaying morgue. And most horrifying, when the water drained, it revealed large red blotches where her skin had been eroded by bacteria from not being washed for nearly 2 months. But Eleanor didn't care. She was taught that water weakened the body, made blood rush to the brain, and made women lose their modesty. A female physician who once suggested she wash her face daily was exiled to a cold, rocky island for life. During a court council meeting, Duke Fernald, who had once led an army to conquer the north, gasped for breath, almost collapsing while attending the princess. But he didn't dare utter a word, because everyone knew that if he did, his head would fly before the incense burner in the room. Yet some couldn't bear it. One night, a young lady-in-waiting named Sarah, only 17, quietly fled Rothermere Palace. She left a letter, in which she wrote only one line. Not all nightmares begin in darkness. Some nightmares shine like pearls and rot like corpses wrapped in silk. From that day on, the curtains in the princess's room were changed to darker colors, to prevent sunlight from waking up the real smell, and servants were ordered not to breathe loudly when entering the room, because the human smell could become vibrant when disturbed by fresh air. In Rothermere, beauty and filth were not contradictory. They mingled like perfume and the smell of death, like silk and sweat, and above all, silence. An unwritten law: don't mention the smell. Don't ask about the last bath. Never ask if the princess touched water, because if you ask, you'll be taken somewhere no one returns from. Every morning, Alinora awoke not to birdsong or sunlight filtering through curtains, but to the clinking of metal against wood, a signal that the makeup team had arrived. Her bedroom door opened, and 7 women entered, their faces cold, their eyes lifeless like plaster statues. In their hands were silver trays holding jars of white powder, swan feather brushes, evening primrose oil, and the most important item: crushed lead paste mixed with vinegar, the sharpest weapon of royal beauty. The ritual began. A lady-in-waiting used a silk cloth to wipe away the previous day's powder, but never completely. For with too much pressure, the princess's skin would peel off in large flakes, like cracked earth in a drought. The old lead peeled off, but not entirely. A new layer was applied, not to make her more beautiful, but to cover the consequences of the previous layer. Thus, each day was a burial of death. When Princess Alinora looked in the mirror, she no longer saw her face. She saw only a white statue, cold, cracked, rigid. The powder was so thick that when she smiled, her cheeks would crack open, revealing the pallid brown skin beneath. The pungent smell of lead vinegar often made the ladies-in-waiting wear herb-soaked cloths to avoid fainting. But they couldn't hide another smell: the putrid breath from the princess's own mouth, because the lead had long seeped into her blood. It caused hair loss, forcing Alinora to wear increasingly heavy wigs. Her real hair thinned, then disappeared entirely, her scalp red and painful as if burned. It caused disorientation. Sometimes she would stare at the rug in her room for hours, muttering phrases no one understood. Is anyone down there? Is anyone touching my face? It destroyed her memory. She forgot her own birth date, didn't recognize the faces of close servants, and sometimes thought she was her mother, who had died when she was 3. During a court session, Alinora sat still as a statue, her eyes wide and vacant. A high official was presenting a petition when she suddenly screamed, "Shut up! You're lying. You want to touch my face, don't you?" "No one can touch my face." The courtiers were stunned. But then, they all bowed their heads, as if nothing had happened. The only person who ever reacted was Princess Orenthia, her distant cousin from the south. One afternoon, seeing the powder on Alinora's face begin to crack like land after an earthquake, Orenthia whispered, "Sister, are you perhaps dying, and no one dares to say it?" Alinora smiled, and instead of answering, she applied another layer of powder. That evening, Orenthia was found unconscious in the lotus pond behind the castle. People said she slipped and fell, but the gatekeeper swore he saw her pushed by a lady-in-waiting in makeup. No one investigated, because royal law did not allow outsiders to question the princess's beauty. In her final days, Alinora no longer spoke. Each time she appeared, she was pushed out in a covered wheelchair, and from afar, people only saw a pale, expressionless face, a strong smell of lead, and eyes that were no longer those of a living person. It was the most beautiful face on the continent. It was also the face of a corpse slowly decaying in silence. People often say, a palace is a sacred place, where beauty and nobility reside together. But if you ever set foot in the East Library of Rothermere Castle, where silk tapestries hung silently and light barely filtered through the wooden door crack, you would understand. Not everything beautiful is clean, and not all silence is peaceful. After Princess Orenthia's incident, all the ladies-in-waiting in the East Wing were replaced. But something could not be replaced: the parasites that had long settled in every nook and cranny of Rothermere. At first, it was just itchy rashes on the wrists of new maids, then red welts behind the necks of castle guards, and finally, a guard collapsing in the middle of his patrol, showing clear signs of a rash caused by lice. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a warning. Alinora never changed her pillow. Her wigs were coated with deer fat, bear grease, and fragrant powder to maintain their shine, but they were never washed. These hairstyles were built into towering domes, so high that she couldn't hold her head up for more than 3 minutes. And within those hair crowns was an entire ecosystem: lice, fleas, ticks, insect eggs, dried bodies of dead bugs, and sometimes tiny maggots, which the ladies-in-waiting were ordered never to mention. A servant once revealed that while brushing the princess's hair, she heard a faint sound, like something alive crawling. After that, she was expelled from the palace without explanation. During court sessions, if you looked closely, you would see nobles constantly adjusting their sleeves, gently touching their necks, scratching behind their ears, or lightly tugging at their trouser hems, not out of anxiety, but because they were trying not to scratch violently in public. The statues of gods in the Great Hall were now covered with cloth, not to avoid dust, but because lice had occupied them like fortresses. One winter evening, a musician named Viral fainted in the middle of playing his string instrument, right in front of Alinora. It was rumored that lice had crawled into his ear and nested. He was last seen being carried into the inner palace, convulsing, his hands scratching his neck until it bled. No one knew if he lived or died. But from then on, the court orchestra was disbanded, and performances were only bronze cylinder recordings echoing from afar. Day by day, Alinora became less talkative, not because she was sad, but because she was afraid. Afraid that if she opened her mouth too long, bugs would crawl out of her nose or mouth. Like one night, a lady-in-waiting witnessed her cough up something wiggling, but she still sat there on the throne, at grand ceremonies, her head adorned with an insect-filled wig, her face covered in toxic lead, and her lips tightly sealed like a living tomb. A secret court physician once wrote in his diary, "We are no longer treating a human being. We are trying to keep a moving corpse from disintegrating before this dynasty ends." Alinora's beauty did not fade, but everything beneath it had died long ago. She was a goddess statue carved from human flesh, and that radiant hair was, in fact, a mobile parasite nest, where life and decay coexisted. And no one dared to speak, because what happened to those who scratched at the wrong time, or opened their mouths to tell a true story? You already know, they disappeared. Rothermere Castle in spring, seemingly a paradise on earth. Lavender bloomed purple along the stone pathways. Canaries sang by stained glass windows. And the scent, oh that scent, as if the entire heavenly garden had been pressed into essential oils and sprayed into every corner, every thread of fabric, every strand of hair. Not because Alinora loved nature, not because someone wanted a pleasant smell, but because it was the only way to survive. From the first floor all the way to the throne room, fragrance permeated everything. Rose, musk, sandalwood, ambergris, licorice, mint. A mixture of scents so expensive that a small vial could buy an entire field. They were sprayed, sprinkled, burned, hung, and soaked into every piece of fabric in the palace. Why? Because the real smell beneath it could make a healthy person faint on the spot. A court official once recounted that during a night banquet, a distinguished guest from the west sat too close to the princess and suddenly fell backward, his nose bleeding, eyes wide and white. He survived, but refused to return to Rothermere ever again. No one laughed, no one asked, because everyone understood. That was the price of smelling royal truth. Fragrance at the palace was no longer a luxury. It was an armor of scent, an invisible wall shielding everyone from the living decay of bodies that had never been washed. People competed to wear the strongest scents. The bolder, the more expensive, the more pungent, the more respected. Those with faint scents were pushed away at banquets. No one wanted to stand near someone who lost the scent battle. Alinora, of course, was the queen of fragrance. Her gowns were sewn from fabric soaked in Neroli oil for 27 days. Each time she entered a room, the overpowering scent was like a whiplash to the senses. Weak servants often had to turn their faces, holding their breath to avoid staggering. There were even rumors that anyone who smells the princess's true scent will go mad. No one knew if that rumor was true or false. But everyone knew. No one had ever dared to try. One night, the wind from a hallway window suddenly blew open the curtain of fragrance hanging along the west corridor. A guard named Halver, standing near the door, collapsed, convulsing, and vomiting uncontrollably. The true smell from the princess's room had spilled out, a mixture of stagnant sweat, dried secretions, decaying bacteria, and rotting lead. After that incident, all windows were completely sealed with beeswax, and every corridor near the princess's room had incense burners burning continuously. And like everything else in Rothermere, fragrance also distinguished social class. The powerful could afford ambergris-blended perfumes. The lowly only had dried mint. Lower servants smelling bad? Sent to the kitchen area. A lady-in-waiting using cheap perfume by mistake? Not allowed near the princess's room. Fragrance, now, became a measure of dignity. How ironic. What should have been a spiritual value became a facade for a decaying body. The fragrance that made people dream now became a shield for survival, hiding a truth no one dared to name. Alinora was no longer human. She was a statue embalmed in flowers, and all beings in that castle bowed before her scent. Though that scent, deep beneath the perfume, was the smell of living decay. Who do you think was closest to Princess Alinora? Her guards? Or her trusted handmaids? No, it was the one who wiped her feces. In Rothermere Castle, there was a strange position, called by a name both revered and gruesome, the keeper of the commode. No one called him a servant. No one dared to order him except Alinora. And despite his cleaner status, he ate at the same table as high-ranking advisors, participated in private meetings, and even had the right to veto council resolutions if he deemed them inappropriate for the princess's health needs. His name was Joran. Joran was not a nobleman. He was the son of a tanner, raised amidst the smell of animal hides and fresh blood. But fate pushed him to Rothermere when his father was summoned to the palace to treat a special horsehide used to line the throne. Joran followed his father into the courtyard, and there, his life changed. A servant fell ill. The princess's commode overflowed. No one dared to touch it. Joran, then only 16, stepped forward. Without hesitation, he cleaned everything with his naive hands, while no one dared to speak. The story reached the princess, and just 1 week later, Joran officially became the keeper of the commode. Don't misunderstand. This wasn't a mere cleaning job. This was high-level politics. Joran was the only one who knew the princess's rectal condition. He held information about her stomach pains, inflammation, digestive disorders caused by lead poisoning, and even knew exactly when Alinora would be in a volatile mood based on the color of her waist. Sounds crazy? But imagine, you are the only one present when the princess sits on the commode. You are the only one who hears her murmuring in the dead of night. Why can't I smell myself? If my feces turned into flowers, would I still be human? Joran began to record everything. His notebook contained notes like, Day 113, loose, cloudy gray stool, accompanied by faint groans. Must tell the royal physician to reduce the lead powder dosage. Day 201, no bowel movement. Mood changed, voice seems shaky. Recommend postponing the meeting with Ambassador Ervith. These notes gradually became a psychological map of the princess. Courtiers feared Joran. They knew, if he revealed that the princess has a stomach ache today, the entire court session would be cancelled. If he said the princess's mood is stable, the national treasury could be drawn upon to fund military campaigns. Once, Count Geldrin argued with Joran about the timing of a blessing ceremony. The next day, he was informed he was going on vacation to the cold northern mountains, a place where no one survived the winter. Joran never smiled. Whenever he walked down the corridor, people fell silent. Children bowed their heads. Adults stepped aside, because everyone knew that man touches the princess's feces every day, and he's still alive. He's not an ordinary person. Ultimately, Joran was not just a servant. He became the greatest secret keeper of the dynasty. And strangely, the only one Alinora looked directly in the eye, not through a veil. One day, as Joran was preparing the commode, Alinora spoke for the first time in 6 months of silence. If I die, Burn my body before my smell burns down this entire country. Joran just nodded. Inside the candlelit golden room, where the throne was placed near the stained glass window, the most powerful person in the kingdom was not the queen, but her feces wiper. When someone mentions religion, you might think of compassion, spiritual cleansing, whispered prayers under candlelight, but in Rothermere, religion was an excuse for filth. Since the time of Alenora's ancestor, King Eglamond, the kingdom had followed an ancient cult called Holy Scent. It sounded beautiful, but in reality, it was a separate sect that glorified asceticism through stench. According to their scriptures, God did not wash his feet when he died, so the fouler one was, the closer one was to him. When Alinora was 10, she once asked her mother, "Mother, why can't I bathe like the girls in fairy tales?" Her mother, Queen Thalicia, stroked her hair, whispering, "Because you are of divine lineage. You were born not needing to be washed. Water cleanses the body, but it dims the light of divine grace." And so, Rothermere Castle became a sanctuary of filth. All bathrooms in the palace were demolished. Water tubs were used to grow medicinal mushrooms. All robes of the royal clergy were soaked in sweat, feces, and urine, what was called the essence of asceticism. When the court expanded eastward, villagers in the conquered areas, who were clean, loved perfumes and soaking in springs, were forced to abandon their bathing habits. Those found with clean, bright skin were accused of being heretics. The punishment? Imprisonment in damp cellars with dried cow dung for 30 days. One of the most infamous cases was the Black Night burning, where 27 girls from Tharnmere village were burned alive for being found bathing under the moonlight in a lake at dawn. The reason stated in the verdict: they tried to wash away the divine grace of suffering. Worse still, under Alenora's reign, cleanliness became evidence of treason. Any soldier wearing armor without a foul smell would be investigated. Any lady-in-waiting with fragrant hair would have her background checked. Children with clean hands were judged as poisoned by heretical lifestyles. Even when merchants from distant lands arrived, carrying perfumes, soaps, herbs, they were warned. A merchant named Rule from Virith, who brought rosemary essential oil soap, was beheaded at the city gate. His body hung on the gate, below a wooden sign that read, "Whoever brings strange smells into this holy land shall be utterly destroyed." Faith and filth had merged into one, and Alinora, though never openly declared, was the living symbol of it. Every step she took carried not just her body odor, but the sacred mark of the chosen one. But the most ironic thing was, this bizarre faith itself killed thousands in later epidemics. Red dysentery, typhoid fever, mouth sores, scalp lice epidemics spread from noble wigs to the heads of beggar children. When epidemics broke out, the priests said, "God is purifying those who have not suffered enough." No one cleaned up trash. No one disinfected, because if you tried to clean, you were opposing divine will. A foreign doctor who secretly left the castle once wrote in a letter, "I have never seen a place where stench is revered as an offering, and I have never seen a faith that kills people with filth." And amidst all that blind devotion, Princess Alinora still sat on her throne, unbathed, unwiped, unscented except by perfume, and became a rotting goddess worshipped by an entire dynasty. When someone mentions the Versailles of the North, they usually think of Rothermere Castle, where gilded domes touched the clouds, corridors were long as mazes, and candlelight reflected on high ceilings like a miniature heaven. But they didn't know, the real Versailles, the name people used to describe luxury, was actually a walking hell. After the death of the previous king, Alinora issued a historic decree: relocate the entire royal family and nobility to live permanently in Rothermere Castle. 10,000 people, one castle, no sewers, no waste disposal system, no place to excrete. Can you imagine? One day, Princess Alinora was walking down a corridor to receive guests from the south. Her gown touched the ground, her hand lightly brushed against patterned curtains. Suddenly, splat, no one dared to react. The entire escort party fell silent, eyes downcast, noses twitching. A servant bent down to pick up the soiled fabric. And from then on, he disappeared. The problem wasn't individual behavior. The problem was, Rothermere Castle didn't have a proper waste disposal system. Urine flowed along the corridors. Human feces dried into layers under staircases, to the point where nobles learned to tiptoe to avoid the true smell of the dynasty. Joran, the keeper of the commode, once wrote, "I inhaled human feces from the moment I entered the palace, and it never left my nose, even in my dreams. Sometimes I dream of the throne melting, and from within it, a stream of urine pours out." Epidemics raged. The first to spread was red dysentery, killing children in droves. Then came liver rot fever, a strange disease that caused the infected to shed skin in large flakes. The royal palace stank like a garbage dump. No one dared to speak. At a knighting ceremony, Duke Avamore vomited when kneeling at the princess's feet. People thought he was emotional. No one dared to correct them. Royal rituals also had to adapt. Ladies-in-waiting learned to breathe through their mouths when applying powder. Gentlemen learned to place scented cloths under their noses when presenting petitions. At some ceremonies, they would place bowls of burning incense directly under the throne to prevent odors from rising. And when the filth reached an unbearable level, they declared its sacred aura mixed with human and earth. A priest once shouted during a sermon, "The closer to the throne, the stronger the smell, because that place contains the most grace." And so, people pretended to smell it and cry. In reality, they cried because they couldn't breathe. And Alinora? She still sat there, lips tightly closed, eyes vacant, dressed in silk, a wig, and a smell so potent it could knock out a full-grown ox. She no longer knew if she was living in a palace or a reeking graveyard. She only knew she was the goddess of decay, and the court had grown so accustomed to it. They found it normal. Walls still draped in velvet, roofs still gilded, gardens still fragrant with flowers. But if you ever have the chance to step into that place, or just stand before the ancient stone gate that once bore the footsteps of thousands of royals, you will realize one thing. Beauty has never meant cleanliness. Power has never meant dignity. And silence is often the most loyal accomplice of decay. Alinora, throughout her life, never killed anyone with a sword, but she suffocated an entire dynasty, not with words, but with her smell. The world remembers her as a symbol of beauty, but those who lived beneath that throne still secretly called her by another name, the goddess of decay. No one knows where her grave is. No one dared to embalm her, because people feared that when the coffin lid was opened, what would escape would not be a soul, but the final, true smell of buried silence. Alinora's story is not to shiver at the past, but to ask ourselves today, how many beautiful things around us are decaying from within? And are we enchanted by layers of perfume, while the truth is rotting beneath that makeup? Perhaps we don't live in palaces, but perhaps sometimes we are as silent as the court of old, because speaking the truth is always more expensive than taking another whiff.